It is game day on Gamecock Central Radio, the Belk Bowl edition of GCR. Emerson Phillips here with Wes Mitchell. And Wes, we're ready for South Carolina and Virginia in the Belk Bowl noon kickoff on ABC at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte. And I think this is an interesting matchup, but Wes, from a history standpoint, number one, South Carolina, an ACC team many years ago. And, you know, there was a time when Virginia was an annual opponent for the Gamecocks. So for some, for those of us who are a little bit longer in the tooth, I think it's an interesting matchup from that standpoint. And what also makes it interesting to me, Wes, is the fact that the Gamecocks have never lost at Bank of America Stadium, and Virginia won the first two Belk Bowls ever played there. So, the Cavaliers have had success in Charlotte as well. So something's got to give today when the Gamecocks meet the Cavaliers.
Yeah, and I think it should be a fun matchup. I think should be a, fairly even matchup. I think two teams that are, looking to put an exclamation point on the season that's had some ups but had some downs as well. And, like you said, South Carolina's been good in Charlotte. I think there are some things from a matchup standpoint that probably favor the Gamecocks, but I think there's also some things that maybe favor the Cavaliers as well. I think this is a game that probably goes into the fourth quarter, and we'll see which side can come out on top. Obviously, South Carolina still dealing with injuries on the defensive side that I think even this game out a little bit, because otherwise on paper, if both teams are healthy, I think could give South Carolina, maybe a pretty decent advantage. But bowl games, very, very difficult to project, I feel like. They're very difficult to sort of predict. And so we'll see. But I think a chance for South Carolina to get 8 wins today.
All right, let's start there, Wes. Let's start with personnel. We'll start with personnel and injuries. Well, obviously, we know that Deebo Samuel is out today, foregoing this Belk Bowl game to prepare for the NFL draft. I certainly don't want to discuss the merits of that decision. I personally don't fault a guy for wanting to not risk injury and go ahead and get himself ready for his professional career. Deebo has done so much for the Gamecocks. I think most folks wish him the best, and we just make peace with the fact that he's not playing today. So it is what it is. But talk about what the Gamecocks are dealing with without Deebo today, and talk about injuries on the defensive side of the ball, which you just mentioned. That was a real problem late in the season and going into the Clemson game. It's well documented. Gamecocks injuries on defense. They were minus 6 safeties for the Clemson game alone. So injuries have been a real problem this year. And how much has the time off to prepare for the bowl game helped South Carolina get healthy?
Yeah, it's helped at some spots, obviously, and then other spots, they're still dealing with injuries. They get Bryson Allen Williams back, which I think is massive for them, particularly when you look at the fact that you still don't have DJ Wanham. They won't have him, a key contributor for this defense his first 2 seasons, but has dealt with injuries really for most of this season. So I think, they wish they had Wanham back. They'll be without Javon Kinlaw in the middle. That's obviously a big hit, as well as someone who's, according to the Pro Football Focus guys, basically been their best, most consistent defender all year long. So that hurts. Injury report today, it looks like South Carolina will have Keir Thomas and Rosendo Lewis, both guys, that are versatile and play up front and, can do some different things for Carolina. So they'll be happy to have those guys. Aaron Sterling, the defensive end, is out with a knee injury. He was sort of a guy that, I think, could have gone either way. It was more 50-50 with him for the game. And then, obviously, Keyshawn Nixon, the cornerback / nickel, he'll be out with a neck injury that, we already knew about coming in. They will get Jalen Dickerson and J.C. Horn back, which is what we expected. And obviously on the offensive side, Zach Bailey is out on the offensive line. And as you said, no Deebo Samuel on at wide receiver. And Deebo was actually at practice earlier this week, around the guys and stuff. I think he misses it already, but you certainly understand that decision. I think he did what he had to do for both himself and his family.
That's right. All right, Wes, the Gamecocks are 5 or 5.5 point favorite, depending on where you look. The total is 53.5 for this Belk Bowl game, Gamecocks and Cavaliers. So talk about South Carolina offensively, Wes. Without Deebo Samuel, the Gamecocks dealt with this last year and actually responded quite nicely without their top playmaker offensively. So do the Gamecock offense, does it go back to that similar look last year when Deebo was hurt? Bigger role for Shi Smith. Talk about, schematically, what are the Gamecocks going to do without Deebo?
Yeah, I think they're in much better shape to absorb that loss issue than they were last year. I mean, They did some good things on offense last year, but obviously, there's a reason Kurt Roper was not retained, and I think they're in a much better scheme of things now as far as what they make defenses sort of contain or make them try to cover. I think last year you're talking about a pretty oversimplified offense that I don't think offered much in the way of making the opponents scared. Frankly, I think clearly you lose an outstanding skill set with Deebo Samuel, a guy that can take the football to the house on any given play. You use him, not just in the passing game, but also in the running game with direct snaps, with jet sweeps, with even just using him as a decoy in jet sweeps and using him in kickoff return game. These are all different ways that he's affected the game. And then down the stretch, he had a muffed punt, recovery at Florida, and then he had a touchdown recovery against Akron in the final game that went for a touchdown. So, Deebo's just done so many things for this team as far as making things happen. They're going to miss that. But I think Shi Smith, it sounds like he's taking more of a role actually specifically in Deebo's absence. Last year he was still in the slot. He was sort of in the same position he's played all this year. Deebo's been more of an outside player for South Carolina, out there on the perimeter, and I think it sounds like Shi's going to play out there a bunch. I think you look at some of those things they use Deebo, like I was talking about the jet sweeps, and just that jet sweep motion, which even if you don't hand it to them, that sort of freezes the linebackers for a split second. The outside linebackers have to consider the containment of that jet sweep guy, even if the ball is not handed to him. So, I think we're going to start to see Shi Smith sort of become more of a household name. I think Gamecock fans, certainly, on Gamecock Central, already know what Shi Smith is capable of, but I don't think he's really a household name outside of the South Carolina fan base. So, to me, he's a guy you immediately circle for this game as being someone who could have a big day and could really start to emerge as one of South Carolina's big threats for next season.
One last item on Deebo here, Wes. I thought it was interesting that Will Muschamp and the Gamecock coaching staff, they challenged Deebo this year to stay healthy for the entire year. He had a history of injuries. They felt it was important for him to demonstrate that he could play an entire season, and he did that this year. So he's elected to forego the bowl game and get ready for the draft. And to me, Deebo goes down as one of the all-time Gamecock greats, so I understand the decision, and I just thought it was interesting that staying healthy was a stated goal by Will Muschamp for Deebo Samuel this year.
Yeah, it was, and that's a goal that he hit, obviously, and I think you look also at the lengths they went to, and sort of modern-day college football, the technology involved, and they have that catapult system at practice where they track everything the player's doing from speed to, literally number of miles that he runs in a given practice. And, they had Deebo basically on what amounts to a pitch count, if you want to make a baseball analogy, where once he had run a certain amount in practice, he's shut down for the day. Huh. So I think that, not only was that a stated goal for the staff, but they took great measures to try and help him fulfill that goal. And obviously, Deebo has made a big step up, I think, from, some of those issues he had early on. Now, some of the injuries he's had just were terrible luck. But some of the hamstring stuff, the soft tissue issues, as Muschamp likes to call it, the lengths they've gone to make sure that those are in his past, are commendable, I think, on both sides. So I think you got to give credit to everybody involved, coaching staff, medical and training staff, and, of course, Deebo Samuel as well.
Gamecock Central's Game Day podcast, Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell. Taking a look at the Belk Bowl. Noon kickoff today on ABC, Gamecocks and the Virginia Cavaliers. Wes, both teams 7-5 overall this year, and both teams 4-4 in league play. We talked earlier this month about Virginia. They were picked to finish dead last in the Coastal Division by ACC Media back in the summer. So they go 7-5. They got a nice win over a ranked Miami team on October 13th, a win that, frankly looked better back then than it does right now. Miami just got trucked by Wisconsin in the Pinstripe Bowl, 35-3, but at the time that looked like a quality win. So for Virginia to go 7-5 and 4-4, third place finish in the Coastal Division, and get to the Belk Bowl, it's a pretty good year for them. They have not won a bowl game since 2005, and the Cavs are happy to be in Charlotte.
Yeah, they are, and like you said, I think that was a win for them that looked really, really good at the time. Now we see Miami starting to fall off, and this is sort of a Virginia team that's been, I think, sort of an upstart program under Bronco Mendenhall. I think you look at what he did at BYU, and you know this guy can coach. They're going to be well coached. They're pretty good defensively. They're very opportunistic defensively as far as creating turnovers, particularly in the passing game. And you can start to see everything come together. Now, this to me was their year. They needed to catch Virginia Tech and beat those guys, and came very close to doing so, but weren't able to do it. I think that hurt. But yeah, this is a team that's going to want to be there. I think bowl games, if you're trying to predict them, you always want to look at both sides and say, hey, are both of these teams happy to be here? And I think as far as South Carolina and Virginia go, the answer is yes. I think they both are mentally in this one, and that generally leads to better play. I think that's something that can't be overlooked.
The Cavs lost their last two games of the regular season at Georgia Tech and at Virginia Tech. Both losses came by just a field goal, so they were very competitive in both those games. 7-5, the overall record for Virginia. And, Wes, when we're talking about Virginia's offense, we obviously start with their quarterback, junior college transfer, Bryce Perkins, who set a single-season Virginia record for all-purpose yardage. He passed for over 2,400 yards, 22 touchdown passes, 9 interceptions, but a very agile runner as well, over 800 yards on the ground and 9 rushing TDs. So Perkins is the offense. He makes them go.
Yeah, he is, and I think you look at the ability to run the football and sort of always being cognizant of that on defense. And, that's something, as we're sort of talking about some keys to this game for South Carolina, that I think first and second downs, South Carolina's inability this year at times to get off the field on third downs, that's directly related to how you play the run a lot of times on first and second down. And I think we've seen teams able to get chunk yardage against South Carolina on those early downs and then get themselves into those easily makeable high percentage third downs. And, Virginia's a team that's way up there, I think 12th in the country in third down conversions, right at 45% clip, I think. So, you look at all those things, and it adds up to that being a major key for South Carolina to limit him on early downs. And they're not a very explosive team, I don't think. They're not going to get these chunk plays out of you, but they are going to be able to just nickel and dime you down the field. And you look at the time of possession for South Carolina for most of this year, it's going heavily against them. And I think that's the biggest scare, the biggest worry for South Carolina, is if this Virginia offense is able to just sort of chip away, stay on the field, and sort of wear down a South Carolina defense that, as we've talked about, is already banged up, is already probably in a situation where they don't want to be on the field for 40 minutes of this game.
Virginia running back Jordan Ellis needs 80 yards rushing today to reach 1,000 for the season. He's got 9 rushing TDs on the year. And a good, workhorse type of back, not explosive, but certainly a worker that will get tough yards when needed for Virginia. But again, everything on the Virginia offense centers around quarterback Bryce Perkins. Defensively, Wes, this is a Virginia defense that was third in the ACC in total defense. Better than you might think at just a glance. The Virginia defense was good this year. Juan Thornhill leads the Virginia defense with 5 interceptions, but the pass rush was lacking at times, Wes. So, a recipe for victory for the Gamecocks. If Jake Bentley gets time to throw today, obviously that favors South Carolina.
Yeah, and I think, this offense has been this offensive line, I should say, has been pretty darn good at giving Bentley time to throw for most of this season. Now, it is going to be a little bit of a reshuffled offensive line. I think the absence of Zach Bailey, it looks like Hank Manos may get his first career start, the freshman, which I think actually says a lot about his development and the fact that he's pushing along. Looked like Chandler Farrell might be the guy, but Hank Manos, from what Colin Taylor, who's in Charlotte and watching these practices, has seen, it looks like Manos has taken a bunch of the first-team reps, at least in the open portions of practice. So, you got Manos stepping in at center. Donnell Stanley slides to one of the guard spots, Darius Hutchinson at the other guard spot. I think South Carolina's in a position to absorb that loss, but obviously Zach Bailey has been really one of South Carolina's better offensive linemen for his entire career. So that's something to keep an eye on. But this is a defense for Virginia that schematically is a little bit different than most that South Carolina has faced. That's something Jake Bentley said last week. Not really a team you can just look back and compare them to. So I think because of that, there may be a little bit of sort of that filling out process early on where, both sides are sort of trying to figure out exactly how the other one's going to handle things, exactly how the other one's going to defend them. And then with that, you make adjustments and see what you can sort of attack, I think. But you kind of, like I said, you have to be careful. Very opportunistic. Virginia secondary. They'll pick the ball off. They've actually got a DB that's got 20 pass breakups this year, which really that's a huge number. A lot of times a solid defensive back doesn't even get tested enough, I think, to get that many true breakups. So he's obviously been tested, but he has responded to that. And, I think Bentley will have to be careful. As we know, he's been, he's been very, very good at times in his career, but there have been times where he's put the ball in danger. So I think that'll be a big key for Carolina as well.
Both teams happy to be in Charlotte for the Belk Bowl noon kick on ABC. It's Virginia's third bowl trip in the last 10 years. So the Cavaliers very excited to be bowling this year. Wes, the broken leg suffered by Zach Bailey was heartbreaking. It came on the last play of the third quarter of the Akron game. This was a makeup game. The Akron game was scheduled late in the season to make up for the Hurricane game that South Carolina lost back in September. And to see Bailey go down like that was devastating. We know how much he's meant to Gamecock football. He's been a big part of this Carolina offensive line. He's been the leader of the offensive line, and an offensive line group that I think was much improved this year over the last couple of years. So that was, a bitter pill to swallow. But anytime somebody goes down, that means it's an opportunity for somebody else. So we're talking about Hank Manos today. The Chapin product, he's a local kid, state champion wrestler at Chapin High, fantastic athlete, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do if in fact he gets to start today, Wes. Been keeping up with this kid through his high school years, and to see him get a chance for the Gamecocks today, that's a good thing. And, Manos could be a key figure on the line for the next couple or 3 years.
Yeah, well, I think you look at it's outstanding that he can play in this game and still redshirt. He's still under that 4-game threshold, and I think that's something you look at and say, that's a positive for this new rule. So, he'll come back next year. Potentially, if he starts, he'll be a starter in the Belk Bowl, which is an outstanding developmental experience for him, and will be able to come right back as a redshirt freshman next year. So, I think again that speaks to his development so far this year. Obviously, he has apparently made progress under Eric Wolford so far, and he may get rewarded with that start, and that would be a big, I think, boost for this line going into next year. Donnell Stanley, a kid that is still yet to make a decision on if he's coming back. He does have another year if he wants it. I tend to believe that he will be back, which would mean South Carolina, if Manos steps up, then all of a sudden I think you feel really, really good about what the line looks like next year. Obviously, you have to replace Zach Bailey, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'm very, very high on Javon Gwynn, the other redshirt freshman interior lineman, but this will give you some options. If Manos is the guy at center, maybe Stanley is a guard next year. That gives you Darius Hutchinson still back at guard, but Hutchinson also could slide out and play right tackle, and you move Dylan Wanham. I think Dylan Wanham definitely moves to left tackle next year, as good as he's been for Carolina. So maybe Gwynn steps in at guard, and you slide Hutchinson out to right tackle. So this would give South Carolina some real options going into next year if Hank Manos can sort of use this game as a springboard.
Wes, we got to talk about strength of schedule, maybe lack thereof for Virginia. I think the sentiment around South Carolina is that outside of Clemson, the ACC just doesn't have much. Syracuse, maybe the second best team in the ACC this year. Virginia with wins this season over Richmond, Ohio, Louisville, Miami, Duke, North Carolina, and Liberty. losses at Indiana, at NC State. They lost at home to Pitt, and they lost at Georgia Tech and at Virginia Tech to wrap up the regular season. So the best teams on Virginia's schedule beat Virginia, Wes. And, again, strength of schedule, to me, it looks like the Gamecocks have played a much tougher schedule, and they might be better prepared to win this game today for that reason.
Yeah, I think so. On paper, I think there's a reason South Carolina is favored in this game. I think they're supposed to win this game. Again, you just don't know with bowl games, and we'll see if South Carolina comes out and plays, sharp, or do they come out and play a bit sloppy, as you can see sometimes when a team has had, some time off. So, obviously turnovers will play a big part of that. Red zone, offense and defense play a big part of that. But, I see this as a game that South Carolina should win, but probably somewhere in, I've been saying like a 27-21, 27-20, maybe a 27-24 type game. I think it probably gets slowed. The game gets slowed down a bit by Virginia if they're able to stay on the field some. I don't know if this is a team South Carolina can necessarily just go blow out because they have been good defensively. But at the end of the day, you certainly feel like on paper that South Carolina is the better football team and should go win this game.
All right, Wes, a couple of other items here. Draft grades are in, and this is a story that we've been following, throughout the month, and there hasn't been a lot of movement on this front until the last couple of days. Jake Bentley, Brian Edwards, could be headed for the draft, and they're going to wait until they get their draft grades, which they just got this week. So let's talk about that for a moment, and what are the prospects of those two coming back to South Carolina for another year? Or does it look like they're going to go pro, or do we even know at this point?
Yeah, I think, and from what they said today, or what they said Friday at Media Day, Jake Bentley is going to wait till after the bowl to say what he's going to do, and he did not disclose what his draft grade is. Brian Edwards is also going to wait, but he did disclose that his draft grade was for him to come back to school, even though he has not officially made that decision yet. I think looking at Jake Bentley, I would be shocked if he doesn't come back to school. Everything I've heard, everything we've seen indicated that we've picked up the last couple of months is that Jake Bentley is definitely coming back to school. He'll obviously make his own, official announcement, but, I think you can pencil him in as South Carolina starter at quarterback next season. Brian Edwards has been a little bit more up and down, I guess you'd say. It's been a fluid situation. At one point, it seemed like Edwards was heavily considering it at the very least, considering leaving. But the word I've gotten probably the last month, or maybe the last probably 2 or 3 weeks to be more accurate, is that Edwards is leaning towards coming back. I think the fact that his draft grade also said for him to come back helps that for South Carolina. I think he'll make a final decision after the bowl game and go from there. It is a fluid situation, but right now I think there's a pretty good chance that South Carolina not only has Jake Bentley back, but has Brian Edwards back as well. And then, like we said, Donnell Stanley has a decision to make too. He's publicly said that he has not made a decision yet. The general word has been that Donnell Stanley will probably be back too.
Okay. Wes, the early signing period was, 10 days ago, and we know that Ryan Helinski, the quarterback from California, will be on campus in January. And I've had several people ask me, what does this mean for the Gamecock quarterback situation? I've had folks inquire about, DeCarrion Joyner staying with the program, and my answer has been that I fully expect DeCarrion Joyner to remain with the Gamecock football program. But I think that's a legitimate question when you look at quarterbacks at other schools that have transferred due to, there being lots of talented players at the position. Quarterback transfers are very common nowadays. So talk about the Gamecock quarterback position with Helinski coming in, DeCarrion Joyner already being part of the program, and, Jake Bentley may return for another year. Where does that leave the Gamecocks?
Well, I think it leaves them in a really good situation.
Yes, sir.
I think we, and my buddy Rob Profit, breaking down film on Twitter, he made a point at some point, basically like, why is at least portion of the fan base already asking who's going to transfer when one of the quarterbacks hasn't even been on campus for a year yet, right, to carry on Joyner, and the other one hasn't even gotten to Columbia yet. I think it's, sure, we can look ahead a bit and say, hey, maybe all these guys don't stick, but at the same time, that's what you want. You want competition at the quarterback position. Look at the big-time programs. They bring in big-time quarterbacks every single season almost. They have a 4-star or 5-star guy every recruiting cycle. So if you're going to be a big-time program, you have to be really good at the quarterback position. The way to do that is to bring in big-time players. If somebody ultimately transfers, then they transfer, so be it. You got to keep recruiting. But right now, to carry on Joyner, he put out a very specific statement saying that he's going to be back, that he plans to be back at the end of the regular season. I take him the way he said it. I take him completely at his word on that. And I think next year Jake Bentley is South Carolina's starter, and to carry on Joyner, Jay Urich, and Ryan Helinski will probably be battling for the number 2 spot. Bentley's a senior. He's probably going to break several South Carolina passing records next year. As good as Helinski's going to be in time, I don't think we need to put the weight of the world on this kid. I know he's hyped. I hype him up. Everybody in the media hypes him up. I get it. Maybe it's hypocritical to say, but hey, let's not put the weight of the entire South Carolina football program on Ryan Helinski. Jake Bentley will, I think, be South Carolina's starter next year, and then they'll go from there.
All right, Wes, today is a huge day for college football fans in the Palmetto State. We got the Belk Bowl at noon, South Carolina, Virginia. So at 4 o'clock, we've got the Cotton Bowl, the first semifinal, the first national semifinal in the college football playoff. Clemson and Notre Dame at 4. Clemson is a 12.5-point favorite in that game. And then at 8 o'clock tonight in the Orange Bowl, the second semifinal, Oklahoma and Alabama. Bama's a 14-point favorite. Wes, I wanted to get you to talk a little bit about these two games. And let's talk about the story that broke with Clemson this week. 3 players testing positive for banned substances, and Dexter Lawrence, Clemson's outstanding defensive tackle, projected first-round pick in the upcoming NFL draft, will have to miss this semifinal game against Notre Dame. So give us your thoughts on that game and talk about that situation with Clemson, Wes. It's mysterious, to say the least.
Yeah, it is. I think lots of different opinions out there about that situation, but I get both sides. I really do. And at the same time, I think you look at the test, and it seems pretty foolproof to me that the substance was in his system. So, I think there's been a certain amount of spin job maybe about this word sliver. There's a sliver of this substance in his system where, I think just based on my understanding, any trace amount or any amount of substance like that is going to be in a trace amount, relatively speaking. So, it's there. That's what the rule is for. Could it have possibly come from something else that he was taking? I really don't know. I do know that these supplements, even the legal ones, are not, produced under FDA regulations, but it's hard for me to believe that he has that in his system without taking something he shouldn't have been. But who knows? I try to stay in my wheelhouse. We'll see. We'll see what the people covering Clemson dig up on that one.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. A lot of folks looking at Clemson with a discerning eye right now, but we don't know if it's a supplement given to him by the strength program at Clemson, or if it, we just don't know. But the bottom line is that there are not players across the country coming up with positive drug tests here, so that's what makes you kind of raise an eye at this. So, from a personnel standpoint, Wes, defensive line is Clemson's strength, but you lose a player the caliber of Dexter Lawrence, that's got to help Notre Dame in some way, you would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I still think Clemson wins the game. Don't get me wrong.
Okay.
It's going to be hard for Notre Dame to win it, but yeah, Dexter Lawrence, a big time player for them. He's a future first round pick, and those guys affect what you do schematically on offense, and I think not having Dexter Lawrence is a big deal. Albert Huggins, I think the kid out of Orangeburg, Wilkinson, will fill in for him, but then that means somebody else has to fill in for Huggins, backup spot, basically. So you go one spot deeper on your depth chart. They obviously have depth on that side of the ball, but, we'll see, man. I think Clemson still wins the game, but this obviously has been a story, and I think it is on Clemson. Now, the bigger story here, and, is the fact that 3 guys tested positive for this stuff. Where did all 3 guys get? Everybody's talking about Dexter Lawrence, but how many people were tested, and how did it get in the system of 3 guys? And I think if Clemson is going to use the defense of, hey, we're trying to figure out where it came from, at some point they need to give an answer. At least, hey, this is where we think it came from, and try to provide some evidence of that. But we'll see where all that goes, and I'm more curious to see if this becomes more of a national story moving forward, or it just sort of I know it's a national story for this game, but from a big picture standpoint, does it stay in the headlines? Does it get further evaluated, or is this something that just sort of goes away after this week?
Right. What happens after this game is certainly something worth following as well. So I didn't want to put you on the spot there, Wes. I know we don't have a lot of information about these positive drug tests up at Clemson, but that was a very interesting story that came out this week, and it could have an impact on this national semifinal game today at Jerry World in Texas. Notre Dame and Clemson. Wes, are you surprised that the point spreads are so high? Clemson a 12.5-point favorite, and it's Bama by 14 over Oklahoma.
Yeah, I'm really not that surprised, honestly. I think those teams are probably that much better on paper than those 2 other teams. My most interesting thing heading into this weekend, though, as far as those 2 games, is can Kyler Murray be the great equalizer? This kid, if you haven't just sat down and watched him play, super fun to watch. To me, he's the most electrifying guy in college football right now. Alabama obviously very good on offense as well, so they're going to be able to keep pace, especially against that Oklahoma defense. But Kyler Murray against the Alabama defense, he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. I'm not going to say he has to do it all, but he's got to do most of it, and he's going to have to keep pace with an Alabama offense that is going up against a defense that's worse than the one Murray is facing, if that makes sense. So that to me is my favorite storyline for those 2 games this weekend, is seeing if Kyler Murray can turn in an all-time, I'll say Vince Young-esque performance where he just puts a team on his back in a key game and goes and wills them to a win. I would actually love to see Oklahoma and Alabama be a really good, hard-fought game.
All right, Wes, go in your closet, pull out your bowling shoes. Let's go ahead and put them on. Let's get ready for South Carolina, Virginia, and the Belk Bowl today. Thanks for your time today, Wes, and a great season with you here on Gamecock Central Radio. We appreciate what you do. Hope you have a safe and happy New Year, my man.
Hey, I appreciate it, Emerson. Happy New Year to you as well. Happy New Year to everyone listening. And, hey, by the way, right now, I want to let everybody know, Emerson, that we've added 2 new features on Gamecock Central. You both have a Rivals gift subscription now, which for Christmas is obviously past, but if you got late Christmas gifts you need to give out or birthday gifts, you can now pay for the subscription and basically send it to somebody else. But also we have Refer a Friend, which means if you get your buddy to sign up for Gamecock Central, you get 2 free months added to your account, and your buddy gets 50% off their first year. So there's no limit on that. So if you get 10 people to sign up for Gamecock Central, you'd get 20 free months of Gamecock Central on your account. So you can actually get Gamecock Central for free for life if you just keep getting friends to sign up. So that's something we just added, Emerson, and that we're actually very, very excited about. So I want to get the word out about that. But as you said, Happy New Year. We'll see if the Gamecocks can finish off the season with a win, get to 8,
yep.
And maybe we should do a season wrap-up next year, or it will be next year, but also next week on the Gamecock Central podcast.
We'll do that. Thanks very much, Wes. All right, that's Wes Mitchell. I'm Emerson Phillips. I want to thank you for joining us today and all season long here on Gamecock Central Radio. We're ready for the Belk Bowl here on GCR. Thanks for joining us, and enjoy the ball game, friends.